Hi, it's Nutter Feinstein. It's Sunday, the 12th of April, and the 25th day of the month of Nisan. And we completed the Passover season, so to say. It was about 8 days in the United States, 7 days in Israel. On the ninth, the night of the 9th of April. So we have to put away all of our Passover utensils, equipment, cooking devices, and so forth, and clean them up, and package them up, and put them away, and then bring out the regular utensils we use for the rest of the year. Remember that during the Passover, we stayed away from things with leavening or rising, depending on the grain we're involved with, and now we can have regular bread. Many people pizza is the front line of that. So we're going forth, but right after, that's Thursday night into Friday, and then Friday night is the Sabbath. So despite the fact the Sabbath is not um, having all the constraints of the Passover Seder or Passover season, we still have to prepare for the Sabbath, which has its own multiple complex laws. So we're still kind of recovering in a positive way. So going forward, I want to take the time to come up with something in the presentation, and you have a term called LIFO in accounting, which is last information in and the first information out. And so I just recently saw I don't know, a news presentation, and it involved healthcare, delivery of healthcare, in the world, not just Jewish healthcare, and questions about what's going on in the system. And this could be any system, not just health care, and is the delivery and um, what it should be, or the products what it should be, your external factors and influences which maybe shouldn't be there. And when you see all this, you first have to filter to say, how much do I know is true, how much isn't? But worst case scenario, you might say, what am I going to do? You have a hotline to the president or to the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, or prime ministers of countries, American Medical Association. Well, what can you do as an individual? And again, as I mentioned, this does not have to do with health care alone. And this is where the importance of the Noahide and its belief in God, partnership with the Jews. And remember, the Jews and the Noahide, as I've been on, how to say, influenced to think, are all under one umbrella. God's will and desire and codes of ethics for both people. Jews are people who were born to a Jewish mother, and people who were converted properly under Orthodox standards, being the Jewish nation and the Noahide nation, and each have their strengths and necessities. As I mentioned before, that you don't realize what is the measure of a person's worth. There's so many factors involved. Usually, in some societies, there's only a few considered, but you have to take into account that people experience things, they do things, they learn things, and have many more inputs. And this creates a person, a human, a special human. And each one of you has that list of potentials or abilities, which makes you special. And God put you where you are. So you can't say, well, if I had only been. It doesn't work that way. You are where you were put. What can work now is what you what you're learning now about God and his ways, as you know of faith. And now you can make a difference as who you are in a very positive way. So it's not like the university system. Experience it myself. You can have a tremendous amount of experience, tremendous amount of degrees, and you may decide you want to go into another area, a very related area, which you sometimes have to start all over again from the beginning. Even you may have more skills, and and that's kind of the downer, and it's a waste of education and a waste of talent. We don't have that here. You are equipped and ready to function as God's pardon and function well because of your experience, no matter who you are and what you've been through. And if it's something you don't like, Torah provides you the way to, correct that conduct and behavior and repair, but especially how to go forward. So be confident in yourself, each individual. And again, the formula is God plus you and your talents equals the potential to be a great world. And we have in Torah literature, it's quoted in the Tanya, it's a Hasidic foundation book of Hasidic philosophy, and it's taken from called a medrash, which is part of the oral law, nevertheless valid because the oral law came with Moses or came to Moshe at the time of the written law, which we can go into more detail later time. But it says that this is the reason, the purpose of the creation of this world, and was a world before that the Holy One, blessed be He, desired to have abode in the lower world, which is our world, the one we're recognized. And there's no distinction to him what's lower or higher. But for us, the distinction is how much revelation of God there is. And God wants us to prepare this world so he can reveal himself and his ways. And through the coming of the Mashiach, bring mankind to that level, appreciate this revelation. So we're here with a goal, and you have the ability to affect that goal. And don't look at someone else and say what they're doing. And as I mentioned before, I had the experience with the eye-opener, one-line statement from a person in a railroad station in Antwerp, Belgium. And I was trying to find myself to see how many people I could help. And he said in the Tanya, it says, if you save one person, it's as if you have saved the world. So a bit of introspection and thinking it over, you can see everybody's in a position to save at least one person, no matter who you are, what your field of work is. And as a matter of fact, if you're not working in a so-called helping field, it's probably maybe even just as impressive or more what you've done. Be the person next door to you. So going forward, again, I want to reinforce who you are, your abilities, whether you recognize them or not. You need to start doing that. I'm confident. And that relationship with God, which is the ultimate relationship and guidance. So being around godly people, do godly works, and do godly things. And then you can make a difference in what's going on in the world. Now, how is that? How do you make a difference by doing that? Or you save someone, or you created a situation. Is that going to change anything? Well, expanding upon this concept that God is the master and creator and master of all the world. And as I mentioned before, and I would call the morning meeting um, phrases, some place where you have help sessions, they have a morning meeting, and in our morning meeting, we say, and it comes partially from the Shema, it's my Israel, and I and God, which is Hero Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And that means that there's an exposition that there's no place where there's no God, or there's no place even outside of God. God creates everything. And not only that, situations, Kol B'Devi Shemaim, all things are by the hand of heaven. Then what is our job, if that's the case? It's just a little fish in the sea? No. It says mankind has free choice to respond to what is going on in the world in a positive way. And what's the positive way? What we learn through Torah, Torah of the Noachites, the Torah of the Jews, and to the point we call Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. In days gone by, self-sacrifice, and unfortunately, maybe even now, is our way of self-sacrifice. On the whole, is the holding ourselves back from something what we want to do, or don't need to do, or shouldn't be doing, in deference to doing what God wants us to do. So that's considered self-sacrifice in this generation. Unfortunately, even now, people are going through the sacrifice of their own lives. And God should bless them and bless their souls and prevent us from happening anymore. We're going to change gears now and go more into direct Torah learning. And you may have heard or written that Malachites are not supposed to be learning Torah. As the Lavash Rebbe said, they must learn Torah to the parts that refer to Noachite, was in many ways much of the Torah, and especially to learn about God and God and His ways and our relationship with God, the best of our ability. Some things go beyond our ability, intellectual. And as one rabbi beautifully said, there is intellect beyond understanding, and there's, I'm assuming not intellect, there is, what do you say, faith, blind faith that goes beyond understanding. And there's blind faith that goes before there's any understanding. And so, in that matter, the intellectual development after the first part, before there's understanding, actually leads to a person um, moving away from his animal soul, the instinctual things, the character traits, the impulses, and coming under the guidance of his intellect, which are more thought out, more rational, more productive. I mean, animals have their instincts and they need it, but we're humans. We have that free choice to reject the instinctual animal behavior, which is essentially pursue pleasure or avoid pain, and go into the gray areas in between to optimize. And in that progression of more intellect over the emotions, we'll finally get to the point where the intellect says, there's something here I don't understand. But it's not out of reason. It's not distorted. I just can't understand it. And this is where the blind faith comes in. So blind faith does not mean irrational, without reason. Now, the other faiths I mentioned before, where people will make self-sacrifice in the name of God and God's ways, is more of an instinct or inheritance from the greats of a generation or our ancestry. And therefore, hold on there. It's give these people credit that there's something in them that makes them a conscience that make them know right and wrong. And therefore, we can go back to the point where a person can learn. The more he learns, the more he'll develop that intellect and narrow that gap between intellectual understanding and rational blind faith. So going back to books, Jewish books, and another reason that we can learn is that I'll give you an example. I was listening to tapes on called Peace and Marriage, Sholem Bias. And these tapes were given by a very knowledgeable, talented rabbi to call chassan and kala brides, potential brides, and grooms and brides who were engaged or close to being married. And they were given classes on what it is to be married, what it is to be a husband, what it is to be a wife. It's not something we just pick off the street. And Judaism puts a lot of respect to this relationship and this situation of marriage, development, raising children. So he said initially, I put out tapes, and there's tapes of the girls and the tapes for the young men. And I prefer that the girls listen to their tapes and the men listen to their tapes. But I know each one's going to listen to the other ones as well. So at this point, the parallel is there's probably a lot of learning. It's not necessary directly for Noachite. As a matter of fact, maybe it'll interfere with the Noachite function to get too involved. Nevertheless, with the internet, especially bookstores all over, Jewish bookstores, and there's no screening process who buys the books and what books. So I know you have your hands on most everything. So I want to at least try to filter what you're learning, put it in perspective, because some things are kind of maybe hard to hear. Some things look like they're very highly slanted to the Jewish nation. I mean, a couple generations ago, non-Jewish will say, "Who cares? You're Jews. You believe what you want to believe, but you're not getting anywhere in our society." Nowadays, maybe someone will look at that and say, maybe the Jews have a better relationship. Again, I go back to what I said before. Everything's in Hashem's hands. The Noachite way is treasured by Hashem very much. And as a matter of fact, in my experience in dealing with Noachites, I've seen more and more. It doesn't take much, but more and more to see the value of having people like yourselves in partnership with the Jewish nation. And it's hard to figure out how to make a mix because when the Jews are a nation apart, the Jews dwell alone, intermarriage is out. If you see how that can be dealt with intelligent people, and sincere people, and optimized as matter of fact. So I'm very happy to maybe the opportunity, if you have questions about what's fair, what's not fair. And I think I've even heard Noachite individuals come up with their own answers, which are better than mine. So going forward, I want to mention this book, which is called this Pirkei Avos, Wisdom of the Fathers. We have a custom, and most Jews have a custom, Orthodox, then the season between the holiday of Passover and the holiday of Shavuos, which I think is called the Feast of Weeks, which is the time of the giving of the Torah. It's 7 weeks after Passover, that we read the book called Pirkei Avos, Wisdom of the Fathers. It has 6 chapters, which will come out to about the number of weeks or Shabbos is between Passover and Shavuos. In Chabad, we keep reading it through the summer in the cycle, one chapter on every Shabbos, every Shabbos afternoon. It is not limited to that for us or anybody. In the first chapter, it begins, if I do it literally, and by the way, Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, is a part of the Talmud, especially the Mishnah. I'm going to show you a diagram here. It's in English, and it may be hard to see, but if you go to Chabad.org and look up Torah from Sinai, just those words, Chabad.org, Torah from Sinai diagram. It'll show you the chain of Torah works up to a certain point. And by the way, that line down the bottom basically says whatever is presented, whatever is known in the world, whatever a student comes up with it, asks his teacher or describes to his teacher, there's nothing new under the sun. It was all transmitted between God and Moses and Mount Sinai. So many things I will be quoting, I may sound like comes from a secular source. In my experience, you always or someone will find a Torah source for it. And if it's a Torah source, you may say, oh, I heard that before from my wherever it was. And both of these things are reasonable statements. Question is, where was the first source of the information? Now, in the Pirkei Avos, first chapter, there's a new type of series, so the page numbers are different in here. Says the Torah, Moses received the Torah from Sinai, Mount Sinai. And that's actually the picture here. It's top of the 2-square block. That's the 10 Commandments. So Moses received the Torah with the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. Actually, the 10 Commandments are actually it's supposed to be a condensation of everything that's in the Torah literature. And he gave it over to Joshua. And from Joshua or Yeshua by the way, Yeshua means Joshua. And that's how it's written in the Hebrew script. And maybe my accents are a little different. Just to be clarification, it's from Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. That's a quick, and also as it goes along in the text, it says from the great assembly, this rabbi received it, and he gave it over to another rabbi. So throughout the 5 or 6 chapters of the Pirkei Avos, you'll see a progression or a chronological progression of giving over this information. In Maimonides, a book called the Mishnah Torah, in his first book, he lists that there were 40 generations. So it really expands what I just read through from the Pirkei Avos. He said there were 40 generations from Moses to the writing of the Gemara. This is after the Common Era, 40 generations, and they're all written down and tabulated or described. So it's actually an unbroken chain from the Gemara and forward. It's easier to trace the literature and the authors and the progression. But the point of the matter is, it really describes how Torah is an unbroken chain from the time it was given on Mount Sinai until now. I remember, I didn't grow up religious. I was Jewish, but I didn't grow up with any of these books. And I read this Pirkei Avos, which is, I hear or see is quite fascinating. There's a lot of, I would say, useful information, whether spiritual or, say, tangible, worldly. And I said to the rabbi I was involved with then, I said, "This is a great book. Who wrote this?" And they smiled. And they said, "God wrote it." It just was transmitted by word of mouth for many generations. The Torah was written down in the time of the Talmudic times. So that's one aspect of Pirkei Avos, the timeline and the authenticity of the Torah. Find also in this chapter, and I'd love to go through each chapter with you. Describes what it takes to be a judge. One of the things it says, then when a judge has two litigants come before him, and by the way, the Jewish court, the two litigants have to be there at the same time in front of each other before giving any testimony. The judge can't hear testimony from one at one time, another time in another place. So when the litigants come to the judge, he has to regard them both as guilty. Then you hear the testimony, all the circumstances, and the judge will make his decision. Once he makes the decision, then they both go out as innocent. How is that? Well, first one won the case, and the second one agreed to ruling of the court and made compensation or corrected his conduct, do what it take to right the wrong. So therefore, they both leave as innocent, come in guilty, so we don't assume one's right over the other, and then go out accepting the judgment. And by the way, one of the main thrusts of Jewish law is for a judge to work out a compromise. Say in later or in other sources that a judge who rushes to hand out a legal decision, even though it's according to the text of the Jewish law, instead of trying to come up with a compromise, that it's an arrogance. It doesn't mean you can't use the Jewish law. Of course, if you can't come up with a compromise and both people are reasonable or very sure they're right, and you can't find evidence to conflict with that, then you need the Jewish law, God's law in the circumstance. God's very happy when you work out a compromise. And it's often stated that we don't think that there's one good guy and one bad guy on the whole. Usually both people think they're doing the right thing. And we have to go with that attitude when we're faced with a legal decision initially. So it also says judge, when he's interrogating witnesses, he should watch how he forms his sentences and his questions, but he doesn't give the witness an angle of how to distort his presentation one way or the other. So a friend of mine and I, after learning this for a while, said, Torah knows all the angles. Now your parents say, I wasn't born yesterday. I've been through this, I've seen it, done that. Torah even more so. So you'll be surprised, this ancient literature, how it comes up with circumstances, you say, How did the guy come up with that plot or that ploy? The Torah already expected it. Another thing that's in here, it says a man shouldn't be engaged in too much conversation with a woman, with his woman, with the woman, and that means his wife. Um, I'm not giving any pointers, guidelines, or time limits, but it's something to be aware of. And he says that's his wife. How much more so from a woman that he barely knows or doesn't know well? It's not his wife. I don't have to go into explanations of what the limitations of that is. So Torah is very, very protective of those laws of adultery. So much so that it we call puts a fence around it. That having a conversation with a woman is not really adultery, but we want to avoid situations where human nature takes over. And Torah has a lot of respect for human nature, especially between the opposite sex. So much so that um, we, with our affairs, we don't have mixed seating in the houses of worship. The men sit separately than the woman. It's not that one's inferior or superior, that you come to a house of worship to pray. So how much concentration can you have for prayer when you have someone you care for right beside you? I mean, there's plenty of time to talk. So in mixed dancing, again, I'm telling you Orthodox conduct. I'm not telling you Noachic conduct, but I'm just trying to present a picture of the seriousness of adultery, the fact that it's put in one of the seven mitzvahs, and this is called pure family relationships. And needless to say, that pure family relationships and family structure is essential. And this comes back full circle. So we're talking about um, potential corruption, wherever it may be. Remember, the world was not created with governments. It was not created with businesses. It was not created with other organizations where you have people at the top making perhaps on improper decisions. And everything consists of individuals. And if there are cultures who are counter society, that again, they're individuals. So we follow a Jewish practice, whether Judaism per se, Noachite. This is where we lay the groundwork as what can I do? How can it be that I'm not just watching a football game and turning off the media at the end and going about my business? But one of the ways you have is to encourage this type of learning, Noahide learning, so that individuals, when they grow up, will have respect for life and property and a person's family integrity, and then a few, and grow up with that and have that imprinted. And the time is at the youth. Of course, it's never too late. So we just don't say that a bad group is there or a counterculture, counter society group is there. It's made up of individuals. And it could be the individuals have left one area, as some of you are familiar, and they're looking for something else. And they're not ready to be atheists. They still believe in God. They still believe in ultimate wisdom, ultimate authority. So you have in your hands to present that information or support those that do. So and raise a new righteous generation. So God bless you all. give you the ability to learn, give you the ability to apply what you learn. Remember counting to 10 in a stressful situation. If your life's not dependent on immediate action, but keep in mind that when things get tough, God's there beside you with will and a way and wisdom at your disposal. God bless you all. Have a great week.